In Luke's account of the Gospel today, Jesus visits the home of two women, Martha and Mary. One is engaged with the business of preparation work and household chores, whilst the other is entertaining and talking with a guest. This reading could be a critique of being actively busy, with the busyness of reordering the world from the disorder of dust and unprepared food. Because this is exactly what Martha is doing. She is ordering the household. She's cleaning, preparing, doing the chores. But Jesus doesn't say what Martha is doing is wrong, but rather initiates a conversation about timing and an understanding of what is going on in the wider context. Mary, on the other hand, displays an intentionality of being present in the moment with God through conversation. Luke's account of this event doesn't say that Mary won't be helping Martha later, but rather suggests that whatever Mary is doing following her exchange with Jesus, she might see the world in a different way, more in line with what God would want. And so the chores that she would be helping her sister with then would be seen and understood and done with a more godly kind of appeal, I guess. The time that we will spend at church each week, or more or less often, is actually to do the same. We put any other activity aside in order to spend time intentionally with God. Sometimes, though, the conversation that we have with God through church can be a little disquieting. Today, I think, is going to be no exception. Because what I have to share with you today is about donation. But rest assured, it's not a disquieting conversation about church stewardship and what you give in the collection plate. Because this conversation, what I'm sharing with you, is not just about donation, but also about death. The context of me bringing these words is the young woman that you see from time to time cartwheeling around the nave during our 10 o'clock service. She is very special. She is a miracle even. A wonderful person who can be quite shy from attention, particularly if it is perceived as pity from a stranger. When Katie was born, she had a condition known as biliary atresia. Her liver couldn't drain its waste product, known as bile, into her small intestine. And what this meant was that at birth, her liver was 3 times the size that it should have been, and she wasn't able to digest food because the bile, the waste product from the liver, is part of what is used by your small intestine to break down the food in order for it to be absorbed into your body. But for those born with biliary atresia, there's a particular operation called a Kasai operation, which is to connect your small intestine directly into your liver, bypassing the gallbladder. And Katie had that operation when she was 6 weeks old. After this, for the first time, her skin and eyes were the correct colour for her, and she didn't itch from jaundice. A week later from that, she was able to be discharged home for the first time. But after a fortnight, we as a family were back in hospital to stay, as her liver was too far gone and it fell over. Her only hope for survival was a liver transplant. And for the next 3 or 4 months, Katie's condition got worse. She had to be fed intravenously. She was hooked up to a machine 23 hours a day. She was on oxygen, and a specialist formula fed through a tube. Her skin didn't just turn yellow, it turned a Trump orange. We waited and waited for a suitable liver from a deceased donor, even one from Australia, but it was always a waiting game. Luckily, Katie had an uncle who was a match as a live donor. Now, matching live donors is a last resort, as it isn't just about a biological match, but an emotional one too. Matching live donors will take into account physiological and psychological stress and the ability of the donor's family to cope. And Simon, my brother-in-law, was a match, and he underwent the procedure. The toll on Simon, though, was tough. The epidural for pain failed. He lost a huge amount of muscle mass as his body used the muscle proteins within him, within his arms and legs and around his stomach as well. His body used that muscle protein to rebuild his remaining liver, and so he lost a lot of that functionality that he had, that strength that he had. And even though he effectively had a desk job, he had to leave his employment and be unemployed for 3 months. Without him, there wasn't another option for Katie, except to wait, and time was running out. So luckily, she had Simon. And thankfully, the operation was a success. 9 years later, with a few ups and downs and cartwheels, Katie is a girl who loves gymnastics, can ride a bike, has recently learned how to swing on monkey bars, and she works hard at school, and she has the everyday trauma of making and losing friends, but she looks forward to living her life, even if she doesn't like being talked about. One of the reasons Simon went through all of this, though, her uncle, was through love, because of love. Love for his family, and a niece who at the time had only been breathing for 4 months when he started down the path of being a live donor. But if other donors' livers had been available, Simon might have been spared the pain that he had to go through. Aotearoa has one of the lowest deceased organ donation rates in the developed world, and in countries, actually, that offer transplant operations. And there are many reasons why this is. There are cultural, religious reasons for these, but also, understandably, squeamishness as well. Also, car accidents are no longer the best places to source donor organs due to car safety features, meaning that bodies in that situation after a car accident are so destroyed that the organs themselves aren't able to be used. So most donations now come from families facing sudden death of a loved one, an unexpected death from someone who has suffered a catastrophic medical event. For that family, a loved one is lying in front of them, someone who they might have kissed goodbye that morning, or waved from a window, or perhaps not even seen them because they left early to beat the Auckland traffic. They won't be returning home that afternoon. In the midst of that heartbreak, the doctors must ask, would they be willing to donate their loved one's organs? Now that is a situation that none of us ever want to be in, nor do we hope that anyone has to face it. Yet when it does happen, the thought is often, what would they have wanted me to decide? But in the moment of standing round a bed, it is often too late to ask. I'm sure that many of you have driver's licences, or at least seen what driver's licences contain. And it might be that people have ticked the organ donor box on the driver's licence. But that was probably a throwaway thought made in the relief at having passed a driving test either 5 years or 20 years or even 40 years ago. And actually in this situation it counts for nothing, as organ donation in New Zealand is dependent entirely on a family being in complete agreement of donating a loved one's organs. For complete agreement to happen, that requires a conversation. And this morning, I would encourage you to spend time with loved ones asking the question about this if the unthinkable should happen. Now, like any conversation, particularly one about organ donation, the answer, of course, could be a very valid no. No, particularly in this instance, is a valid and a cared-for response. What is important is not necessarily the decision to donate, but rather having the conversation in the first place. Out of that conversation, many reasons might be suggested as to whether you would or you wouldn't donate your organs in this event. Or it might be a caveat to say yes to large organs or no to skin or eyes, or the other way around. But you will only know if you ask and share what your preference might be. We are reminded in the reading from Genesis this morning that when we value something, we talk about it. Abraham and Sarah had been promised offspring, yet it had not yet happened. Abraham then had that conversation with God through 3 strangers. And Sarah, even whilst working in the tent, listened and responded to the conversation that perhaps maybe she should have been a part of in the first place, given that it was her body that was going to have to give birth. But regardless, she was listening in the tent and responded to the conversation, in a sense, inviting herself in through laughter. That happens just after the reading this morning finished. She laughs at the thought of God giving her a child at the tender age of her mid-90s. But with this, God then brings her into that conversation. He brings her mirth into the discussion, making Sarah a part of the conversation of what is important to God and their family. The outcome of this conversation between Abraham, the 3 strangers representing God, and Sarah, the outcome was Isaac, and the development of the faith that gave us Jesus and our own relationship with God today. So my encouragement to you today is to do the same and have the conversation. To have the conversation about a time that we hope and pray we will never have to face. And that's not about Abraham and Sarah having a child. That is about the possibility of sudden death. Regardless of the outcome of that conversation that you might have with your loved ones, If that then leads to further conversations with colleagues and friends about, last night we had the strangest conversation over the dinner table, then that's actually even better. Because whatever your decision is, whether you would want to donate or not, whatever your decision is, by simply having the conversation and having it with more people, you will increase donor rates through others having the conversation too. Simply by talking, we increase the opportunities for life for people like Katie. We also increase the chance that live donors would never have to go through the same thing that Simon had to go through. That live donors wouldn't have to choose to face something which is so painful and inconvenient because there are no other options there for the people that they love. When we have the conversation, when we have any conversation, regardless of organ donation or anything else, it allows us to see the world and respond to what happens in it and live our lives in a way that is so much more in line with what God would want. Have the conversation.